difficult question. I mean, there clearly are economic benefits to be had there. But there are community ties that are severed as well.
So if I could jump in here, I think one thing that's really important to note is as we've experienced community breakdown, we've also experienced declining geographic mobility. And it seems actually that people being able to self-select into an area where they can be productive, have a good job, raise their family, and feel fulfilled is a better way to build community ties. So since we started measuring geographic mobility in the 40s, it's declined. I think it's down to a third of what it was. I think it was at close to 4%, and now it's at a little over 1.5% of households who move in any given year. And actually, if you look at single unemployed men, they used to move at close to 8% a year, and now they're down to, sorry, I just wrote an essay about this. This is why I'm getting details. But now they're down to like 2.6% per year. And so I think that that is actually one of the things that is holding communities back is the declining geographic mobility rather than, so I mean, I understand, right? I took like my husband who had never lived anywhere else and my child who was like the only grandchild on either side and moved him 700 miles away from where we had all of our family ties. So just on a personal anecdotal level, I get that it is difficult to lose that type of community. And it's certainly difficult for people who haven't had a lot of opportunity to think about taking that risk and moving elsewhere. But it actually, to have that sort of fluidity in the labor market seems to keep community development in place rather than the opposite. So that's just what I would note as an interesting feature.
And I'll add a speculative thing too, or more anecdotal, because I think that people, regardless of, you know, we think of community as like a set area, you know, like a geographic region where people know their neighbors. But there's also a certain community in people that are like-minded and share things, right? And so if you look at, like, illegal immigrants are generally incredibly mobile and responsive to the labor market. And they seem to largely move into communities that are similar to, that share their kind of cultural values and a lot of things that they can also identify with. And so I think there is something to be said for other forms of community that might not be explicitly geographically based.
Well, there are two different types of policy questions too, right? So that some of these questions on like the macro level, like Jonathan had some good and some, you know, very misguided like ideas on criminal justice reform. And I used to be a prosecutor, so this may be why I'm saying this, but I think that these are like macro level questions that have macro level policy implications and require, you know, federal action. Some of the other things we've talked about local community empowerment or how you rhetorically make the case to your neighbor on why they should vote for you know, specific candidates or specific policy initiatives is very much a different question. That there's really truly been like a loss of the desire to be persuasive to our neighbors, I think is really sad, and that we need to gain that back. But I think that those are, often you ask how they can get squared, I think they are easily squared. So I actually had this same question to Michael Strain last night at a dinner, who was talking about, gosh, what was he talking about? I forget now. Oh, I think he was talking about extending unemployment or long-term unemployment benefits or something, and then creating like block funds to give to the long-term unemployed to avoid having to pay them over 99 weeks long-term unemployment insurance. And I said, well, this is a great idea, but like, what about like the local level, da-da-da? I had the same question, and his response was, well, I'm just a national, like, macro guy, so this is what I'm thinking about. And I think that's a really good answer, actually. I was kind of like, okay, well, that makes sense. So that's our macro answer. What's our local answer? And I don't think you have to necessarily square all these things away like they're competing with one another, but that it's really a menu, a series of policy preferences that have to be implemented on the local, state, and federal level. I think, unfortunately, we are so far gone on losing political battles on the local, state, and federal level for these ideas that we need to fight on the local, state, and federal level, and maybe even on the individual level for a lot of folks. But
I think one thing that is important is to keep things in a self-selection model, right? So like you can, if you make block grants available to move, there's actually a Mulvaney bill that does that right now. Whether it will go anywhere, we will see. But it's not as if, you know, you're not going to get unemployment benefits if you don't indicate a willingness to move. You can stay in your community if you need to take care of your elderly parents, or you can go elsewhere if that's what works for you. And I think that helps in sort of the national perspective. this answer has gone on for a really long time. So if any of our panelists have something to add, yeah.
One little thing, if we can get the government to stop breaking up families, I would very much appreciate that sort of micro level analysis. I mean, I come from this from a very personal standpoint. My father was a cop. My brother was a drug felon. He missed the first 7 years of his daughter's life because he was in prison because he made some stupid mistakes. And I'm not saying the government, I mean, granted, yes, I'm libertarian, drugs should be legal. But insofar as, hey, how about let's not throw someone in a cage for violating these laws? You want to fine them, you want to put them in community service. There's all sorts of options where society can still pass this judgment like we don't want people to do this. But when he got out, he couldn't get a job. He couldn't do anything, and he basically wasted away until he died last year. And it's this idea that we're like, well, let's not it's like macro level, micro level. The macro level basically killed my brother, and it's that sort of understanding. If we want to humanize this, let's humanize it like that, and understand that this is the government doing this. And yes, they anti-drug laws, most people who enforce them are well intentioned. But it really is the government destroying families, and painting it any other way just sort of ignores a giant problem.
And with that, I think we have a little bit of time to hang out here, but we all eventually, and before too terribly long, can make our way to Laughing Man, or I think the options are really endless in this neighborhood, but that's where I'll be. So there you go.
So again, let's thank our panelists.